I'm an allergic person. The average person has an IgE score, an indication of how allergic you are, of somewhere between 0 and 100. Mine, at last check, was over 2,000. To give you some idea of actually how allergic I am, I recently treated myself to some Apple AirPod Maxes. I wore them for an hour, fantastic headphones, but then my ears looked like this for about 2 weeks afterwards. Now, I don't actually feel like I'm allergic to any foods, but every time I try and give this back to the hospital that prescribed it to me, they just look me in the eye and say, "Do you have a family, Steve?" I do know that I have food intolerances. By that I mean my body will digest it, but it's just very unhappy doing so. For example, wheat makes me bloated and tired, milk increases my eczema symptoms, and if I have some nuts, my lip curls up like Elvis and my throat does get a little bit too tight for my liking. So when an advert popped up on my social media feed, seemingly endorsed by Karen Brady, who's a big deal here in the UK, and endorsed by West Ham football team, I don't know anything about football, i.e. soccer, but my friend's a big West Ham fan. I do know that when I say how have West Ham done, he quite often says they came second. I checked the advert's authenticity and then I checked their Trustpilot scores and then I ordered a kit. Now, I think the results of my test will surprise you, and it has left me thinking that perhaps you don't always want what you wish for. Let's get cracking. I took a blood-based IgE test. The kit came in a box. There was a kit inside to help me prick my finger, collect my blood, there's only a small amount needed, and then send the kit back to them. And then the results were returned to me within about 4 or 5 days. And to be honest, it was a depressing read. Now, as much as I had lots of green foods on this list, foods that I could eat freely, there were also some amber ones which I could have perhaps once or twice a week. But there was a long list of red foods. And the red foods have a score of 30 or over. The higher the score, the worse they are. And these are foods that I should avoid completely. So here's my list. And as you can see at the top with the highest score is casein and milk protein, followed by milk. And that matched my experience of using them and feeling unwell. But as you look down the list, there's lots of common foods. So you've got eggs at 78, oat at 67, rice at 42, corn at 37, and even potatoes. Who has an intolerance to potatoes? So for breakfast, I stopped eating cereal with cow juice on it a long time ago, but I do love oats in the morning, and now that's out the window. Eggs? No. So I can't even have an omelette. A vegan protein shake made with pea protein. So that's also on my list of things not to eat. I was left for breakfast with things like smoked mackerel and spinach with some sriracha. It was delicious. And also things like bacon and cooked meats. And these are great. These are delicious breakfasts, but they're kind of like weekend treats and they take a little bit of time to prepare. And they felt a bit rich and a bit time consuming for, say, breakfast on a Tuesday. My favourite barbecue sauce is a no. It's got cornstarch in it. I then thought to myself, I treat myself to, if I'm not eating chips and fries and potato, I get some sweet potato fries. I look at the back and it's got potato starch in it, rice flour and corn flour and cornstarch. I give up. Thankfully, Supply Life sent me a meal planner a few days later and gave me options to swap out the foods that I was intolerant to for alternatives. So for example, they recommended buckwheat porridge, which I liked almost as much as normal porridge. And when I say almost as much, I mean not as much. My diet had become very much meat and veg or something from the alternative list, which although was very comprehensive, it was time consuming, it was more expensive, and it was just more effort than I would want to put into a meal just for me. But there were some pretty impressive plus sides to this. After a few days, the first few days, I kind of felt like I couldn't get enough food in, like my body was really urging me to eat the foods I hadn't been eating. But after about 2 or 3 days, my mood really improved, my workouts improved, and I actually felt bright-eyed and really quite amazing. I also had this weird sensation like I'd lost an organ. Now, if you've got I.B.S. or you're watching this video because you think you've got a food intolerance, you will probably be very familiar with the feeling of having a full bowel. Even if your bowel is empty because of your food intolerances, it can feel full all the time. So without this there, it just felt like something was missing. And for the first few days, it was quite a strange sensation. Then I got used to it, and then I just really enjoyed the feeling. There were also some other impressive results. My resting heart rate actually dropped by 5% and stayed there. And my HRV, which is essentially your get up and go score, your heart rate variability, that increased by 11%. And the final benefit was, I mean, at the risk of oversharing, let's just say after a few too many of these, my wife and I would quite often have to seek refuge in another part of the house for 10 or 20 minutes, if you know what I'm saying. So what were the downsides? Well, it meant that I was preparing meals differently to the rest of the family. It also meant eating out was not impossible, but just really quite restrictive. I'm self-employed. Quite often I like to camp out in a local Starbucks and work there for a few hours. And there is not one thing on my local Starbucks menu that doesn't contain at least one of these ingredients. I sometimes get energy lows, so we'd quite often have something like a Huel bar. I'm not sponsored by Huel, but I'd quite often have these in my pocket, or a few in the car, for instance. Food that isn't likely to go off and spoil, that you can just grab easily for some good energy, just to bring levels up. So I ended up swapping those out for things like these. So these are sesame snaps, which is essentially sesame seeds and sugar, or polos, which I think in the rest of the world might be called lifesavers. And when I'm eating these sugary snacks, yes, I get that little burst of sugar, but if I eat this stuff, I just want to eat more of this stuff. It doesn't feel particularly good for me. I was also food prepping every day, like there was a zombie apocalypse coming, and our food shopping bill probably went up by somewhere in the region of about 15 to 25%, which isn't that great in a cost of living crisis. And sometimes it felt so restrictive that I'd just fall off the wagon. This is one of my favorite breakfasts on a weekend, and the only thing on this plate that fits with what I should be eating are the tomatoes, the mushrooms, and the bacon. And I just kind of thought, I'm having that full English breakfast. An hour later, I felt terrible, and the next morning I weighed myself and I'd put on 2 pounds. So was it worth it? I mean, I'd say 50-50. I'm not gonna say yes or no because I really enjoyed it. So in conclusion, should you take a food intolerance test if you think it may help you? And I would say a caveated yes. The question I would ask is, what are you going to do if you see foods on that list that you're not prepared to avoid? Is the sacrifice worth the result? So an example would be my wife. She had a test, she took one look at it and said that isn't sustainable for me. She kind of half followed it for a few days and she did feel better, but the feeling of being better wasn't worth the sacrifice she was going to have to make potentially for the rest of her life, avoiding these foods that she actually enjoyed eating. There's also a high possibility that you'll get a result which is easy to work with. For example, you might swap out Greek yogurt for a plant-based Greek style yogurt, or cow juice for something like an oat milk with calcium in it. In my case, I just found out that I could feel physically great and mentally frustrated at the same time, and it wasn't really for me. So going forward, I will do my best to avoid the things right at the top of the list, and I'll probably settle for somewhere around 50% of the results for maybe 50% of the effort. So it has helped me. It is kind of quite life-changing if I could adhere to what it was telling me to do. I really did feel better, but it just wasn't worth the extra effort for me. Well, I hope you found this video useful, and if you've taken a test, please let me know how you get on in the comments on this video, because I'm keen to find out. And until next time, see you soon.